And I am going to go ahead and get started now. Good to see so many of you filtering in as attendees. I do believe I know most of you, but in case not, I'm Brianne. I'm the director of the Washington State Main Street Program. We are a program of the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation that is managed by a statewide nonprofit called the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. And I'm really happy to be able to say that we're able to provide this webinar and the others that are coming up in September through a grant from USDA. So thanks to them as well. In our capacity as Washington Main Street, we've been incredibly inspired, especially over the last 6 months by the work and the hustle and the creativity of Main Street programs in Washington State. And we want to say congratulations and thank you for everything you've done. It may be difficult to see it in the midst of this moment in time that we're in, but from the statewide perspective, and I know Trip and Norma have an even higher viewpoint than me in terms of this, we are seeing that your work is incredibly critical right now. You're keeping businesses open, you're keeping your communities hopeful, and we want to celebrate you in that. You've responded incredibly quickly and effectively to the impacts of COVID-19 in a way that is not necessarily surprising because we have been saying Main Street is built for this moment. But we also know that there's sort of an inflection point that a lot of us are feeling right now, where we want to move from crisis mode, because we've been in it for much longer than we ever expected, and move into recovery mode. But what does that look like? And so that's the nature of the conversation today. And we're just very grateful and glad to have Norma Ramirez-Demise from the National Main Street Center and Trip Muldrow from Arnett Muldrow and Associates with us today. Most of you are very familiar with these two faces, but I'm very excited to have a conversation with the two of you today about this topic. And with that, I just wanted to ask if you would elaborate in an introduction of yourself, including giving us a bit about how you have been working with communities over the last 6 months. And then within that scope, what is it that's giving you hope right now? Norma, would you kick us off?
Thank you. Yes, hello everybody. For some of you, it's a hello again, because we've been working with many of you recently with good conversations. It's a good question to start. I'm very hopeful and very positive, thanks to the conversations we've had with many of you. But I have the opportunity to work with many communities across the country as the Director of Leadership Development for the National Main Street Center. And I've been working with communities from East to Midwest and again with Washington as well. So across the country, I've throughout the last few months, I've gotten a very strong level of appreciation, and if I can say proud, especially of the Main Street leaders. Main Street directors are a great example of what I called, and many of you have heard me, the first responders for Main Street businesses. And we are the connectors, and you have been a tremendous example of that, communicating, connecting continually from the start with businesses, with the leadership in the community, making sure there are resources, making sure there's assistance, pushing for assistance. So again, very proud of you. I've also grown with a lot of hope as well. I can honestly say I was very concerned about how stretched that stress level has been, but I've been very proud and hopeful, because I see you also responding with a very important role as the ones that are building a sense of stability for the district, with all the activities and initiatives that you are creating. If anything, it's giving us the opportunity to focus where the focus needs to be, and increase attention to the retention of our businesses, to redefining what promoting the district might be in the future as well, expanding that area, expanding the view of our presence online, and reaching out to people to continue to support and build the spirit of community that is always very important for Main Street. So I've been inspired by all of you because you're the ones that keep this going, have really given us an example of what Main Street leadership is all about.
Thank you, Norma. Go ahead, Trip.
I'm Trip Muldrow. Good to see familiar names. I'm with Arnett Muldrow and Associates. I'm in South Carolina. I think since I saw some of you last, I'm in full disclosure, I am a COVID survivor. So that was interesting. I too really appreciate what we're seeing across the country as we work with Main Streets. I'm really inspired by the hard work that you all are doing as directors, and your board and the businesses. And some of the things we've been doing working with communities is we actually worked with Tupelo, Mississippi to kind of reinvent their engagement. Their Main Street program, social engagement, was kind of a catch-all, and we created a dedicated Facebook interaction for merchants and customers to interact, and then also an internal merchant communication method so that it wasn't getting diluted. And what it's done is greatly increase participation. We're also working in Alabama in several communities, and will be over the coming months, on doing training accompanied by actual grants for COVID safety. So businesses in the communities are receiving both training, they're getting plexiglass, they're getting foot stops, they're getting spacers as part of that. And that's been a really neat partnership there that we're seeing. And then we have done some videos that we worked with one community in Washington State, Kittitas County. I see Debbie is on here. And we've worked with Connecticut as well, just to get some online training for businesses to get them online. The final thing I'll say too, and this is something that I think for those of you who are directors, is I've been able to do merchant roundtable meetings in a couple of communities. And, I'm really accustomed to those meetings being a mixed bag, I mean, I've been at this for a long time. And, when you whenever you have a group of merchants, you're going to have some that are positive, some that are negative, and some that are neutral. I have had some of the most amazing positive feedback in merchant meetings that I've probably ever had in my career. And that really points to the energy and excitement and the kind of, I don't know, this esprit de corps that Main Street brings to these communities. And that is a real refreshing thing to see. There's still some folks that will struggle. We know that. We keep hearing that. But the positive stories are the ones that are really remarkable. So it's exciting to see merchants adopting, and going full tilt on experimenting on things as well. So
yeah, Trip, I agree. It's been really exciting to hear some of those stories from local programs in Washington. And in terms of merchants, one of the other things that I know Norma and I have been hearing pretty well across the board is that Main Street businesses are seeing the value of their Main Street program like never before. And that certainly speaks to how dedicated staff and volunteers have been in terms of getting information out really quickly and responding and helping businesses find creative solutions. And it's funny that it's the two of you working with us, because I think that we started saying Main Street is built for this on a webinar that you were part of with us with Oregon Main Street many moons ago. But we keep saying that in Washington State because it feels so very true. You know, when I say Main Street is built for this, I'm really talking about how Main Street relationships with business owners and with other partners that have been cultivated over a long period of time have proved to pay off tremendously in terms of the ability to communicate really effectively and make some of those really quick and creative decisions. And it's very rewarding to hear that that Main Street directors and volunteers are hearing that reflected in their communities to that value. So I wanted to ask both of you, you know, from your perspective, why have Main Street programs across the nation been so very effective? What is it about how we work that really does mean we were built for this moment? Trip, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Well, first, I just want to say I love the phrase, and I'm spreading it among other states, that Main Street is built from this. And I know Norma can expand on this, but you know, one of the things I keep talking about is the very beginning of the Main Street program. We were coping with a calamity in our country, and it was a calamity that was a prolonged 20 to 25 year decline in our downtowns. And so the very construction of the base foundation of Main Street is out of a severe calamity, a disaster. And so the way Main Street was designed was to address that. And through the years, I think, you know, as we've matured and things have happened, sometimes it's easy to forget that when Main Street was born, it was really a disaster, you know, kind of situation with our downtowns. And so that's why I believe Main Street's built for it. And even today, a couple of the things that really come out to me is Main Street organizations tend to be nimble because they're not encumbered by the regulatory settings of local governments, you know, to first, second, third reading to get some sort of policy change. They're also bridge organizations between elected officials, governments, business owners, and the consumer. And just that very construct fills such a critical gap. And then I'll wrap up with one other thing is, one of the things Main Street has always been focused on is results and action. It's not a group that just kind of talks, you know. And so being results oriented and action oriented, Main Street doesn't have to, you know, oh my gosh, we need to motivate for action now. You know, you've been motivated for action for years. It's just a different climate right now to be motivated for action.
Yes, and I just wanted to follow on that. I agree completely that Main Streets have been built for this and for this moment as well. Although throughout the last 4 decades, we all have experienced different levels and different types of revitalization needs, of the reasoning to bring vitality back to our communities. But I believe Main Street has been so effective throughout because, again, it's that need that makes us look for solutions. And the Main Street approach is a framework that allows us the great opportunity to keep an eye on all aspects of revitalization, not just the physical when it's a physical disaster, but it's the economical aspects, the life of our community as a center of activity, and also the opportunities to help each other. So every aspect of the 4 points can be used by the community through Main Street's efforts and focus in the district. But also the grassroots formats that we have with community-driven approach allows us to build strong relationships with businesses and, like Trip said, you know, with the leaders. And so we are able to be connectors at every level of from the ground through the top leadership, and then bring us into a team effort. I believe that Main Street programs have been effective in stepping up to important roles, especially through this pandemic. We've never experienced a pandemic like this, at least in our lifetime, but we have been effective in stepping up as the primary connectors to the businesses, and then as essential business support specialists in many ways, you know, trying to figure out, learning ourselves, what does it mean to go through these grant applications or paperwork, and feeling their pain. And I think that we have also been effective in becoming the holders of community spirit by showing that the district can be that scenario, that stage of good messages, inspiring messages. So overall, I think Main Streets have been built for this, and every time there's a need, Main Streets step up. And so I'm very proud of that. And again, the leadership is what makes it or break it, is what we often say. And Main Street leadership has been the strong example of how we can be connected to the grassroots and also be the connectors to, you know, all sorts of resources. So a really good opportunity to just keep these factors in mind, these elements, and start saying to ourselves, we have a whole package of value that we offer as well. And so, and then help us through this process, build the messages that come back with support to Main Street as well. So just a great opportunity to look back and say, it is good to know, to feel it, and then to act on it so that the community can keep in mind how they can help their businesses and their district as well.
Yeah, Norma, I'm so glad you said packaging your value, because that is language that I get from both you and Trip. So let's dig into that a little bit more right now, actually, because we are really advising all Main Street programs to think about how effective and critical they have been over the last 6 months. Own that. Know that you have been that first responder for your businesses. But then how do you package that so that your stakeholders really understand your value? And then also thinking about, you know, the sustainability and longevity of your organization. How can you use this moment where you've been keeping your community together in a lot of ways? How can you package that? Do you have any concrete suggestions or examples about how a Main Street program can do that, Trip?
Well, first I need to pay the Washington Main Street program a compliment on this. Having worked with you, Brianne, on the messaging, you know, on Main Street is built for this, and the various pieces of your economic impact study, and providing that in a clear, consistent, concise way so that the local programs have access to that messaging that is relatable to their communities. I actually don't know of another program in the country, Norma probably does, that has put together such a concise sort of value-added piece that succinctly summarizes how this works. The other piece for me, and I've been on my soapbox for this for a while, and I think we'll talk about it in future sessions as well, is the construct of communities has been, well, first of all, I've always said that those of you who are Main Street, you know, programs, you are in the business of economic development. And all too often, the construct of communities has viewed economic development as that EDC that does the county, you know, recruitment of the big industry or whatever. But what's happening with Main Street now more than ever is the kind of economic development that we really need. It's economic development that supports local businesses. It's economic development that pays back to the community multifold, because you're there helping those entrepreneurs and they're spending in the community. And so I really would encourage those of you who are not using or haven't seen it, or I'm sure you've seen it, of course, but you know, you may want to take what the state is doing and maybe translate that into some of your own messaging that parallels that. I think that's just such a critical thing right now. And having that seat at the table as the economic development entity that understands independent businesses, because there really isn't another entity. And I'll wrap up with this real quick. I was on a call yesterday with the Connecticut Main Street program, and I had 2 communities that did not have main streets in them. And the economic development directors there were lamenting the fact and hoping that through this effort, their communities would realize the value of Main Street, because they themselves understand that there is a gap that needs to be filled in that. So that's kind of, my take on it.
Yeah, I would say, when I look at in my past life before Main Street, I did disaster recovery. And so from that experience, we talk about simplification throughout the process. And I've mentioned in some of my webinars the need to really acknowledge the phases of crisis. And the first one is immediate response, right? Having to act quickly to respond, to provide an immediate solution, if possible. But then to start building stability to manage the impact, and then understand that there will be recovery, and to plan to get there with that long-term vision. Through our conversations, we've talked about all this and how through this pandemic, it's not a crisis like any other where we can say from here to there, in 3 months I'm there, and in another 3 months I'm in the other phase. There's a lot out of our control that we've experienced. But one thing that it's important to say is that, again, or I would say 3 things we can be proud of. Something we need to always look at what we can be proud of, how we responded, and take the positives first. As humans, we tend to go in the negatives, but really make sure that you and your boards, and when your conversations with community leaders, you are the one who brings the positive and say, what can we be proud of, and highlight those elements. But also the opportunities, the lessons learned, what can we learn from this, and then how we can go about in leading recovery, right? One of the things that I think is essential for us as Main Streeters is that we've always been known as hardworking people that make things happen. And that's a wonderful thing to know and to be proud of. But at the same time, we've not always given ourselves the time to stop and say, oh, let me look back and how things have gone. Whether it's an event, we go from one event to the next. We go from what do we need to do next? And to give ourselves the time to look back and say, what are the positives? Highlight the value. Take time to review your value proposition. Because we are so focused on what we do and not always on the value of how we make it happen. And that's important. And so those are the 2 full responsibilities that I think we need to keep in mind, is not only be able to say what we have accomplished and what can we make happen, but also how it came to happen, so that then all of it becomes a package. So take time to review that, take time to expand your concept of communication. We've talked with some communities on that, and I think it's very important to go beyond the information sharing to promoting value, the value of the district for the community, the value of Main Street for the community as well, and for the district stakeholders. And then beyond focusing on tools, like, oh, I need to get this done for the website or for the social media, it's more about telling our story and really coming together to figure out what the story needs to be based on our audiences as well. So I'm glad that Tripp mentions as an example, Washington Main Street, because that's what I've seen with Brianne, is that strong focus on saying, how can we provide value and then act on that. And I see many communities having an increased focus on their communication tools, but be very careful that it's not just the tools. It's not just about being online. It is about making sure the online presence takes us somewhere and gets us the results that we need. So I would say about packaging is the key word that we need to keep in mind. It's not just the tools. It's not just the, I need to do fundraising. It is about the value. And so I would encourage all of us to really look at the opportunity to take the time, and whether it's a very casual virtual lunch with the boards and the committee leaders, or among the ones that are available, to really take a look and say, let's look back and then review the positives. What is the value? If Main Street wasn't there, how hard would it be for a city to function without us? How hard would it be for Main Street businesses? And then create that sense of value. I often talk about, we suffer from the mother syndrome. Being a mother myself, I know we don't take credit for anything. It is after, in many ways, the kids start saying, oh, my mom did all this, right? But in many ways, I've realized, we should do more marketing about that, right? Just in a joking manner. I think in a lot of ways, we behave similarly. We need to take the value of Main Street and use it so that support can be coming back to the program. So packaging our value is an important task. I see many good websites, but I think overall, it's an opportunity to review everything and make sure the message and the tools provide that picture of value, so that communities can get it in their minds and say, oh, I need to be engaged and invest in Main Street as well.
I love that idea, Norma, of getting the board together over lunch or something, and actually having that discussion. If not for our program, what would the last 6 months or 10 years or what have you look like for our community? And again, really own the impact that you are having. Yes, use the Washington State Main Street Impact Report. I put a link to that in the chat. Thanks for the shout out, Trip. Before we move on from this idea of packaging your value, I want to ask Trip, are there any sort of next steps you might recommend for a community after they have that sort of grounding conversation about look back at our successes and what would our community be without us? And I'll drop a few potential ideas in here. Are there any specific data points or types of testimonials even that you might recommend they gather for that value toolkit?
So I think we have a window that is open right now that various Main Street programs have nudged open to some degree in the past, but it's wide open right now. And so we do not talk enough about retention across the board. And, it's an economic development fundamental. We talk a lot about recruitment, but what this pandemic has done is really forced our Main Street programs to look at retaining existing businesses. And I think that is a bellwether data point that needs to be identified. Just yesterday, on that conversation I had in Connecticut, I'm going to be indelicate here, but I'm just going to say it. Every district is going to have businesses that close, but there was a community that their Main Street or their downtown organization, they're not official Main Street, they actually explained why certain businesses closed so that it wasn't they owned the message, because some of them closed, quite frankly, because this was it and they were ready to close and they were on their way out. And I experienced that in my own hometown of Greenville. We saw a series of closures on one block of downtown, and the local newspaper was like, what's happening to North Main? And it's like, well, actually, she retired. This other business, she ran a restaurant and a shop, so that was 2. We had another that just, you know, they'd been at it for years and sold it to somebody else, and it went into another use. And so it wasn't a lack of, you know, quality or demand or whatever. The other window that's opened is, and I'm a planner, and so those of us who are in my profession are really good at box checking, form creation, you know, regulatory things, fee structure, you know, and we'll beat this thing until it just, you know, is just a pulp at the end of it. And so what we're seeing across the country too is a breakthrough, let's say that, on let's experiment, let's do creative placemaking, let's do those things that we were afraid to do. Let's close the parking spaces and do outdoor dining. You know, and of course, climate is an issue. So, you know, in winter, how are we going to face that? But working with the planning agencies to streamline or eliminate some of those regulatory barriers, and Main Street should be taking credit for some of that as well, because you're on the front lines, you understand what's going on, and you're also willing to experiment and be the one that runs interference for the local government regulators who are tend to be a little more risk averse to changing some of these regulations. And believe me, as a professional planner, you know, I've been in meetings where we'll talk for 2 hours about why we should or shouldn't have this. Should it be 2-hour parking or 30-minute parking, you know? And so those are 2 things I really think are opportunities moving ahead.
Yeah, good point, Trip. That's actually one of the ways I'm explaining Main Street right now to people in my life who there are people in my life who don't know anything about Main Street still. I'm explaining that, you know, a lot of those really creative uses of streets have been pushed through because of Main Streets being able to work in both the public and the private sphere. So thank you for mentioning that. And you both have really, I think, touched on this next question, but because this conversation is about mindset, I do want to ask directly, in this moment of change, which, you know, provides opportunity for reinvention and redefinition, where do you hope to see the Main Street movement going? Norma, can you address that first?
I really appreciate the opportunity that we have, and I am hoping that each of us really looks at those faces that I've talked about, and not only feel proud of what you've done, but also recognize that this is a game changer for Main Street, giving us the opportunity to, number one, perhaps build the case that we are the base for small businesses, as we should know. In other words, redefining what small business is, and knowing that Main Street and Main Street programs, Main Street districts and Main Street programs are kind of like, you know, the picture of when support is needed and when that support is successful. So overall, I'm hoping that a game changer will be, if we can build the case, is that economic development needs to redefine what small business support is. It has to be about really small businesses to start. Let's go to the ground level and then go from there. But that support in our communities especially, it's not going to be easy, you know, at all levels, but in our communities, build a case with your local leadership. And have those meetings where saying, well, economic development has been this, but let's take this pandemic and confirm if these businesses in the district or any small businesses in the community close, the economy gets hurt tremendously, right? And so build a case for small businesses. I'm hoping that's a part of our game changer, so that then more resources can be outlined and in place, no matter what, in good times and in bad times. But we're going to need a few years to really get to the good times. And we need to build a case for those small businesses to actually have a support system. And then for the leadership in your communities to understand that there's no more local resource specialist at a Main Street program. And that also calls for a game changer for our programs to say, well, yes, in the past, we were really focused on the 4 points in many ways, but not necessarily in a balanced way. Now we have been focused on economic vitality in a way that we have not before, perhaps. And that's through making sure business retention, just like Tripp said, is a strong focus. We see that as a priority, an overarching priority for the next few years. And yes, recruitment is an important part, and perhaps because it's the excitement of getting something new that sometimes gets us to focus there. We need to consider the support to the property owners in a way that they can strategically define what the space needs to be, the space that can complement the businesses we have, not just change the whole environment of businesses. And so there is attention needed to that, but it doesn't need to be the first tier of the attention. The business retention continues to be the strong focus in the future. And then rebuilding consumer confidence or rebuilding communities' confidence that we can move forward. And that will not only require for us to really reinvent or redefine what promotion means. It's not just about bringing people to the district, it's about taking the district to people wherever they are. So again, we have to be catching up with those opportunities while before bringing people through events got the biggest percentage of our time now. It's an opportunity to say, let's look at the 4-point approach and look at how the overarching priorities that can get us a very good and clear recovery strategy, where we're going to pay attention to the businesses we have, work with the property owners to make sure we make smart and strategic decisions about space, but also use the design focus to really build that strong sense of place that will get people to feel welcomed and safe. And then look at promotions stating that, you know, the district can be in people's homes as well, and they can enjoy that, and our businesses need to can catch up with those opportunities as well. And overall, that the Main Street program, after all this, is the instrument of support for true economic development. That means small business support, for community spirit, for community connectivity, for a sense of place. Everything that Main Street is giving us the opportunity to redefine our focus, to elevate our roles, and to more intentionally promote the value of Main Street as well in our programs.
Yeah, I love that, Norma. It feels like, you know, we've always probably had a seat at that economic development table. But now we are in more of a position to be the head of that table and to say, let us lead you in what economic development needs to be about, because it's what we already specialize in.
Yeah, that should be definitely in our minds and in our hearts, and then define that message and those opportunities. And again, that includes not just us as Main Street directors, and I continue to, even after a decade or more, I continue to put myself in that club, just because I think we are passionate about the work we do, but also we need to expand that passion to those that have a very direct benefit of making these changes as well. And that's our volunteer base as far as businesses and property owners and that are in the board or that we can get in the committees.
And this is, you know, to hear Norma talk is just like music to my ears. And, you know, because she really has such a pulse on what's going on. And I just want to reiterate what we're seeing and the trends moving ahead reinforce everything Norma just said. We are looking at, and if you want to look at, you know, McKinsey's doing like a weekly consumer behavior report. And they're, you know, they're a really well regarded firm. You know, people are looking to feel safe. they're looking for comfort. They're looking to stay close to home. They're looking at, and then the other trends we're seeing for, I love when you talk, Norma, about the retail spaces. You know, we are looking at a whole different array of how spaces are dealt with. And this is a huge opportunity, I feel, to jump on connecting the trends that we're seeing with the mission of Main Street. Because the trick would be, and I'm guilty of this myself, someone will send me an article, you know, retail's collapsing, da 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 da, you know, and then I'm like, well, let's just dig a little deeper on this. And you know, you start reading the article and it brings up J. Crew and Lord and Taylor and, you know, all these other things. And I'm like, no. We're talking about independent businesses. We're talking about downtowns. We're talking about districts that can be creative in how they deal with space so that people can be together without, you know, in this pandemic, they can be together, but not, you know, violate the social distancing that we need to have. So I think it's important that we connect those trends with what Main Street is doing.
Yeah, good point, Trip. And that's a good opportunity for me to plug next week's webinar, which is all about economic trends and opportunities for Main Street. And that'll be, Trip, thanks for joining us again for that one. And then Norma's colleague, Matt Wagner, leading that. So excited to dig into more of that, because I really appreciate what you're saying about getting into those headlines a little bit more, and then looking at Main Street's opportunities within some of those trends too. Switching gears a little bit, and I'm going to make a quick interjection to myself to say, please do use the chat and Q&A functions. We have about 15 minutes left, and we will leave some time if anybody does have questions for Norma and Trip. But we really want to focus too on how our people are doing, how our executive directors and board members and volunteers in this moment. I know that's something that all three of us think and care a lot about. So can you kind of share what you've been seeing in terms of how Main Street leaders have been operating, including, you know, as we are shifting our mindset from crisis mode to recovery, what recommendations do you have for all of these very hardworking people out there who may be looking for that shift personally too?
If I may, then I'll take that. And I would say, as you know, my focus very, very much is in looking at how the leaders have done throughout the last few months. And again, we hit the ground running no matter what. That's the Main Street way. And I'm, like I said before, very proud of how Main Street directors took it and run with it. And throughout the last few months, but also I know we were all hoping that by the beginning of summer, we were going to see a change and come out of the house. And the reality is that this pandemic, unlike any other crisis, put everything of our lives that we had been placing in compartments in work, family life, all in one basket at home. And so that definitely created a number of psychologically, emotionally, and name it, in physical levels of stress that we've all been experiencing, whether we realize it or not. And I say we because I believe everybody, even, you know, people that are not in Main Street. But because we are built for this, we always tell ourselves we can keep going. And I would say that the opportunity first is to, if I may extend an invitation to say, give yourself permission to not do everything yourself, and to tell yourself that you can move beyond doing it because it has to happen, and I might as well make it happen. And I know the old pattern needs to have an opportunity to be more of an empowerment or an instrument to empower people to lead. And that's the leadership role that I'm pushing more and more. And then to think of yourself as that opportunity to get people to do. not just me, right? And so give yourself permission to not do everything and to set a goal that you're going to look at people and say, how do I value each of the people that we have had around us in the program supporting us? But also give yourself permission to start that empowerment by putting in place a sort of human resource management process or structure, which is not always something that we take the time. And again, that's an opportunity to say, going beyond doing it ourselves to actually being the leaders. Also going beyond projects to tell yourself that you're the program manager, not just the project or event organizer. Take yourself and stretch, elevate your role, especially with Main Street directors, because what you've been throughout the last few months after we were expecting to be done with this, is that you've continually built stability, and give yourself credit for that. But in order to really lead recovery, we need to, again, take the time to start taking a look at, again, what we're proud of, what did we learn about it, and take action on how we're going to grow and change. And those are the opportunities that we have ahead, especially for ourselves. I'm so very proud, and I think that's the reason why many Main Street directors are stolen by other organizations or companies or corporations, is because we are so valuable because the Main Street creates wonderful leaders and builds it, but we need to sustain ourselves and give yourself the opportunity to analyze what are the best things that make you the best leader you can be in the future as well.
And I only want to add to that too. I love that idea of giving yourself permission. The one thing, if anything, you all, you work so hard, and it is okay to not be okay. And if you've got, and this is a great chance, I think in the climate that we're in, when we think about nationally where we're in, and things seem to be so bitter and rude, but empathy and care and your board kind of knowing that, hey, look, it's okay to not be okay. Board member, business owner, I may not be okay. I think that's another critical piece of this is self-care, because, things are not going to just disappear if you need a day to be with your kids or to sleep, So I just want to put that in there, because I just think that's such a key piece. And I'm having so many conversations with clients and communities that, some of them are very formal relationships, but instead of asking, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. It's like, how are you? How are you? That inflection, to really dig deeper. And it opens the door for a comfort level that I believe we've never had before. I think it also strengthens the bonds that we have in the mission that we're pursuing.
And I just wanted to highlight on that note, and it's so valuable what you're saying, especially again, because we're having everything in one basket, to start telling ourselves how we're going to take some of these pieces and putting in their own place. And I really loved an article that Ellen shared with us when we were having a conversation. I hope you don't mind, Brianne, if you or
no,
Ellen.
I'll post it real quick.
But it's about the search capacity, and it's talking from a journalist that has experienced that capacity reaching the full spectrum. But it's just a great opportunity to read and reflect that, yes, it is okay to not be okay, but then to allow yourself the opportunity to say, how am I going to do it? It's like I always say to Main Street directors, be the strategist. And sometimes it has to start with us, figuring out how we can do the best taking care of ourselves that we probably haven't done in the past, because we're always on the go mode. And so take a good opportunity. For me, it has been sometimes just having the opportunity to be in midnight and say, I need time to reflect. How am I going to be? Or early morning, or just going for a walk and start thinking. But allow yourself to disconnect, to think and reflect, to give yourself a lot of credit for what you've accomplished. Please do that. The positives are never enough. We tend to jump to what we need to do before we celebrate. So take a look and do that so that you can be in a good place to lead recovery throughout the next few months and years.
You know, I was having a conversation with one of my friends last night, and we were talking about our personal lives, but I think it reflects in what you're both saying too, that, you know, the empathy and the care that I show my friend and the things that I tell her about how well she's actually doing and how she should give herself a break. And those things are so true for our work lives too, especially right now, Norma, as you're saying, it's all in one basket. So I think that's one of the opportunities we have within Main Street. You know, I'm channeling Linda here when I say we're a family. So, let's lean on each other to the degree folks are wanting that for themselves. Call a fellow Main Street director, call me. Let's show empathy to each other, and we get and give in those interactions. And I really appreciate, Trip, what you're saying about, us sort of, I think you said, bonding over our shared mission in this moment and having more grace with ourselves. These are things I would probably never have imagined we would be saying on a webinar a year ago. But again, let's look at the potential positive changes that can come out of the ways that we are sharing and learning from each other right now. So we have a couple minutes left. I'm trying to follow the chat a little bit. Ellen and Jesselyn, really appreciate you commenting here. Norma, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say another opportunity we've learned from this experience, even at the national level, is that in the past, leadership development has been more about what we need to be doing, right? But we are more conscious now than ever before about, stress management and how many tools and opportunities we can give to allow this network to be more connected with each other. And so we're talking about that and formulating tools that are going to help us keep fostering that connectivity, that mentorship, and that just being there, which we are. That's what we do through the national conference, right? Just come together and celebrate and get together. But in these times, we're also taking a look at how we can do it even from our own places. So keep in mind that we're definitely looking at the opportunities to connect you all and to provide you more intangible support that we haven't in the past. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, and one thing I love about Washington Main Street is I know that you are a family, and when one of you is in need, I can call, I'm not going to name names, but it's like, hey, did you hear about this? Have you checked on so-and-so? And I love Ellen's comment here, a buddy system. It may be that you want your buddy to not be in your community, and just say,
it really is.
yeah, right. It's like, you know what, my buddy's going to be over here. And that gives us, just that chance to kind of release. So.
I'm seeing several of you commenting on that. I'm glad you're already establishing buddies. That's lovely. And if you do need support in any way in finding somebody outside your community to call, we can work on that together. As we are wrapping up right now, I do want to say that this is the first part of a 3-part series. These webinars should be able to be digested as one-offs, but they are sequenced strategically, meaning we wanted to talk today about where we are at as leaders, where our organizations have been over the last 6 months, celebrate the successes and talk about, packaging that value and moving forward out of crisis mode. But in order to do that, we also know that it's important to look at the situation that we're in terms of what the economy is doing, what we can expect in terms of trends and opportunities. So that is the next webinar. If you're watching these live, it's September 17th, a week from today, at 9:00 a.m. All of these will be recorded, so you can watch them on demand as well. And then a week later, we're going to be getting into the how, the planning side of it. What are tangible strategies for moving your Main Street program forward? And that is on September 24th, also at 9 a.m. So as we wrap this up, I did want to offer Trip and Norma any closing thoughts around this concept of moving from crisis mode into something maybe more proactive and positive. Go ahead, Trip.
Yes.
I think for me, what I'll share is that this is our opportunity where experimentation is okay and mistakes are okay. We expect perfection, and that's something we've been driven to expect. These times are so weird that experimentation and going out on a limb and doing things differently gives us a chance to do things that we didn't imagine we could do before, or we're putting up artificial barriers to it. So I think my parting shot would be experiment and don't worry if it doesn't work, because at this point, we are doing some building the plane while we're flying. So.
And I just wanted to say that the basic thing for me is to say thanks. You have been the leaders making things happen on the ground level. You have been inspiring as we look at the examples of what you've accomplished throughout the last few months. And yes, it is not just likely. I'm sure that we have all been stressed. But again, allow yourself the opportunity to take time to just be by yourself or to connect with others and say, this is my time. And so if we can connect with somebody that can give us our time, and you trust and their feedback and support, that's also a good thing. To really reflect on how good you are and the opportunities that you have to continue to lead this movement at the local level, because we depend on that, but also we appreciate everything that you do, and allow yourself the opportunity to be a leader that engages others, even with just positives. Look at the positives in others as well, and they'll reflect on that. We've had conversations with many of you, and again, everything is inspiring because I gained so much out of your efforts. So thank you for everything that you do, for inspiring others, inspiring us, and for making this movement the kind of movement that every community should be part of. And I appreciate, again, everything that you do in your community as well.
Well, thank you to everybody who joined us today. And special thanks to Trip and Norma. We in Washington really value your partnership and vision. And thanks for being along with us, especially over the last 6 months. We've definitely felt support from you, and looking forward to the next few conversations later this month with you as well. Have a good morning, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.